Up next, we will have Dance USA's Engaging Dance Audiences. Audience engagement is community engagement. This session will be introduced by Amy Fitterer, Executive Director of Dance USA. We're so happy she's here today. And moderated by Suzanne Callahan, founder of Callahan Consulting for the Arts. And they're going to be joined by grantees for Dance USA's Engaging Dance Audiences program. It is a fabulous panel. We're all lucky to be here with it. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amy.
Hello. Oh, there it is. Hello, everybody. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dance USA's program called Engaging Dance Audiences. And this is a really interesting style. I'm going to try to recognize everybody in the room here. So Engaging Dance Audiences was first founded in 2009, and with a focus on recognizing that how people were engaging with dance, how audiences were buying tickets, going to shows, was drastically changing, right? And it's changing for so many reasons, and it continues to change today. Engaging Dance Audiences started out with a focus on innovation. And it was really looking to try to instigate a small group. There were 9 grantees in that first round who got pretty large grants, over $100,000 each, to do experimental, innovative projects and changing the way we think about engaging with, which means connecting with, developing relationships, bringing in people in your community to interact and understand our art. The second round, which was the first round that Ms. Suzanne Callahan had the opportunity to oversee. We decided to then do what Ben Cameron at the time called the Settlers. So round 1, and Ben Cameron, who at the time was the program director for the arts at the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, he said round 1 was like the pioneers. We sent out the pioneers. But round 2, let's do the Settlers. We're going to send them out, and they need to take what happened in round 1, learn from it, adapt it, modify it. So we ended up having over 20 grantees. They received smaller amounts, but we wanted to reach more people and get them playing around with those ideas. During that time period, Dance USA adopted core values of equity, inclusion, and diversity. And what that meant is that we had to take everything that Dance USA does, internally and externally, through these core values. And it's a constant, ongoing learning, reevaluation, changing experience for Dance USA. So Suzanne, who was managing the program, came into my office and she said, okay, if these are our core values, we need to take a look at engaging dance audiences. So Suzanne and I put our brains together and we spoke with Ben Cameron, program director at the time of Doris Duke, and we decided to, 1, remove the membership requirement. So you don't need to be a member to apply to engaging dance audiences. In that round 3, there was financial support available to some of the grantees to become members. Because once they got a grant, we wanted them to be fully engaging with us. Another requirement was that we removed or lowered a financial barrier. So we allowed organizations with budgets as low as $150,000 to apply. Now some of you might go, that is still way too big. And that is very true. That is something that we're really still struggling with. Suzanne and I talk about it a lot. Is how do we give a grant which could come $40,000 to $60,000 all in with GenOp to an organization whose budget might be $70,000, right? So we have some challenges around that, so we keep working on it. The other thing that we did is we allowed fiscally sponsored dance groups to apply. Because we know that there are so many dance organizations in the United States that are working without their own 501c3, and they're doing it really, really well, and they're touring around the country, and they're getting great reviews and awards, but who cares if they don't have their own 501c3, right? So why are we making that such a big deal? And it was fabulous because the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation allowed us to have fiscally sponsored groups apply to us. We then also changed our panel. We changed our funding guidelines. So the panel was majority individuals of color, people with disabilities, which was a requirement as part of our program because what we were also looking to do is fund organizations that had a proven track record of reaching audiences of color, people with disabilities in the LGBT community. We didn't want an organization applying to us that had never done anything like that before and then get a grant to try it out. We wanted to support those organizations that had already been doing it and doing it well, and then to come in and refine and push that work further. So all those changes meant that round 3 grantees were a completely different group of grantees than Dance USA had ever seen before. And they got to come to our conference, and we were sitting there, and you look out that room, and you're like, wow, this is really awesome. This is a possibility for Dance USA to challenge ourselves in breaking down the very own barriers that we create to engage with us. So we now have been renewed for round 4, and we're keeping a lot of the same criterias and changes from round 3. Because one, we felt that there was success, but we also felt that you can't do something once, right? You have to keep doing it and learning from it and tweaking and modifying and growing constantly. So with that, one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is community versus audience. Now, I don't know if Suzanne remembers this, but we once had a conversation a few years ago, and I don't know, there was a book or something being written, and I was like, well, maybe what we're really talking about is community engagement. And this was like 4 years ago. And I think Suzanne might have said, I don't know, I think we need to be a little more specific about audience. And both of us have grown over the past several years, and now we're realizing there isn't a fine line when you're talking about community or audience, right? The people in your community are the ones we want to know about our art, to find themselves in our art, to want to be connected to us, whether they're already part of your definition of audience or not. And so thus, we are now calling this breakout session Community Audience Engagement is Community Engagement. Okay, so with that, I am gonna stop talking because this is not a session about me or Dance USA. This is about hearing from our panelists about some of the projects they have done and their learning. And I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne Callahan, who has been working really closely with me since I became executive director in 2011, so 6 years now, on this program. She manages it to the T. I have a lot of confidence in her, and it's my pleasure to have her moderate this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you all for being here. And right off, in terms of credit, I want to say that my evolution goes to Donna Walker-Hune on the whole audience engagement equals community engagement. I don't know if you remember this about 18 months ago. Maybe I just needed to hear it a few times. So let's just start out with a question. No wrong answers here, and there's index cards if you are the note-taking type. When you think about your work in audience engagement, actually let's start out, how many here are dance artists who actually create and or produce tour work? About half. And how many are presenters or educators? We've got about a third to a half as well. So when you think about your work connecting with, engaging with communities and or audiences, however you define it, what does this notion of community mean to you? Take about 30 seconds and think about what community means to you, because community means a whole lot of things. And then take 30 more seconds and share with a neighbor, and we'll time it for you, so don't worry. No wrong answers. And the introverts don't have to say a word, and the extroverts get to share a few thoughts with us in about 2 minutes. And the extroverts could share the introverts' thoughts. So 30 seconds to think, 30 seconds to share, and then 30 more seconds to share. The extroverts are already sharing. Okay, so go, and I'll give you 30 seconds. So go ahead and share with your neighbor.
Knowing the connecting, like really understanding who else is just knowing my audience. That being really important. And the other kind is talking about trust in that relationship. So as an artist, do I feel safe sharing what is in that moment, my truth, what it is in that moment I'm trying to express? Do they feel safe sharing their reactions? And if they be calling me out to be like that.
So shift sides, and the other person can talk now. what this notion of community means? Anybody at all? You can shout it out, you don't have to raise your hand, we'll just popcorn it.
The people we're working, the people who are with us.
People that are with you.
Yes.
Where you live.
Where you live.
The people who support your work.
The people who support your work.
A group of people that have some semblance of like a shared agreement about.
Oh, you and I would get along so well. Yeah, you're going to hear that in a minute. Well, other thoughts? People you live with, people who support your work, people you are with, people who you share something with.
People who could have an interest in what we do.
People who could have an interest in what you do. Well, so this notion of what community means, and again, my sort of main connection goes back to something Donna said years ago, but it really pondering this question has become a big part of EDA, and it led in part to today's session. So if community, broadly speaking, is a group of people who share something, they have something in common, then what we'll talk about today is their shared experience either with or through dance. I'm going to just share a few quotes from James Baldwin. James Baldwin said, "It was books that taught me that the things that tormented me most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive, who ever had been alive. You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in this history of the world, but then you read." I think we could adapt that quote, but then you dance, or then you experience dance, or then you see yourself, or you feel something within yourself through the art form of dance. Baldwin also said, "The role of the artist is exactly the same as the role of the lover. If I love you, then I have to make you conscious of things that you do not see." A lecturer and writer these days named James Chang, who wrote the book Who We Be, A Cultural History of Race in Post-Civil Rights America, says constantly as he tours and in his writing, how do we change the way we see? Well, deep audience engagement, like what you'll hear about today from our artists and our whole panel, including Donna, is about helping change the ways in which audiences see, what they see, how they see it, how they feel about it. And I would also offer up that we as arts practitioners can change the ways in which we see our audiences and our broader communities around us. Collectively, EDA in rounds 3 and 4 has strived to connect with artists and with communities in a world that is pretty complicated. We live now in a world where identity can be a source of pride and unity, or of shame and fear, as I learned from Marjani, preparing for this session, where place can mean home and neighborhood, or it can mean displacement and gentrification. Where our actions as arts practitioners, in our words, in the environments we create, in our theaters, through our residencies, in our neighborhoods around us, can send strong signals to people, as do the people we put on stage or the people we don't put on stage, of whether or not they belong, whether or not they're invited and welcome in. These societal problems persist, but so do the contributions of visionary artists like the ones on this panel and people who support them, also like the ones on this panel. So these are choreographers who make timeless connections through what we do share, whether it is through social dance, or it is through hair, or hair stories, the kinds of things that we all have in common. These panelists are here to share some deep observations about that work. Today is to provoke thought about what community means and to build and nurture it. It's not to leave with a set of sort of how-tos. We start today with Donna Walker-Kuhn, president of Walker International, who has been helping helping artists and organizations build deep and authentic relationships with their audiences for decades, and whose book, Invitation to the Party, is a treatise in story form of how to do that work. We then go to Marjani Forte Saunders, who is an independent choreographer and who worked formerly with Urban Bush Women as a facilitator. UBW being a company who, through the leadership of Jawale Willa-Jo Zalar, as our round 3 panel said, wrote the book on audience engagement. We then go to Indira Goodwine, the managing director of Camille A. Brown and Dancers, whose trilogy of work around identity is echoed through a spectrum of audience engagement activities that takes that dialogue and those feelings and that sense of identity directly into the audiences with whom they work in the theaters, around the city, and in other cities to where they tour. Donna, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Wow, what a great, great group. I feel so much energy. I'm surprised the ceiling is still here on the room. But that's what happens when you get a group of dancers together, right? Absolutely. So I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about my favorite topic in life, which is dance. So I can say that amongst you guys. I can't say that everywhere I go. You know, some people get a little upset. So what I want to talk a little bit about is just how we frame the idea of community and how we develop tactics, and then I'll just share a couple of case studies on how I've been able to try to tap into building awareness and support for dance. I think, first of all, we have to think about building audiences, how important it is to frame the understanding of what is the product. I think the biggest challenge I've had working with dance, and I started 1982 as the managing director for the Thelma Hill Performing Arts Center. I don't know if anybody even knows about it. Yes. But great, yeah, so that was a long time ago. And then I went on to be the marketing director for Dance Theater of Harlem, you know, for 9 years, which was absolutely incredible. All this time, and then of course I was in NJPAC, and all this time working with dance in various forms and different clients, what I have found is the number one obstacle, people didn't understand the product. They just didn't know, what am I going to see? And am I going to feel awkward? Because when you say modern dance, does that mean no music and people looking as if they're in pain? If it's ballet, I don't know the story. I get lost. Cinderella, Swan Lake, who did what? You know, so then, of course, when we talk about indigenous dance, then that audience is only that community that even knows that it exists when I go to African dance performances or South Asian, you know, even Asian. And so I find the constant that's most important is to talk about what is the product, what is the dance, what do we do, how do we do that? So we look at internally. You're thinking about building community, who do you currently have? Always do an assessment. You know, if any of you are in the business of making dance, there's somebody who's coming to support you. So who is that? And what are those like-minded constituents? That's how you start to take those baby steps towards really building your community. And then is it just audiences who come to you, or do you go to them? You know, we live in a very mobile society now, so everyone's not necessarily waiting to buy a ticket to go see a dance performance. Maybe you might want to go to where they are and to create something really interesting and unique. So I think there's an internal and an external way of looking at how we are developing our audiences. So that, along with defining it and not dumbing down. I'm not talking about trying to simplify the work. I'm talking about how do you illuminate the work so that people personally don't feel as if there's something wrong with me because I don't understand what I'm seeing. I remember the first dance performance I saw. I was 5 years old in Chicago, and I saw Swan Lake, and it was by Maya Pleskowskaya, who at that time was a reigning ballerina. And when I saw her, I just said, that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a dancer. I want to be like her. It never occurred to me that this was a field at that time, that there may be few ballerinas of color or what opportunities I would have. I just saw something that was incredibly beautiful and magical. And my mom, for some reason, thought that I should go to see it. You know, so from that point, you know, I was fortunate to be in environments that continue to support and celebrate dance, and I performed in an African dance company for many years in Chicago. But I think that without all of that exposure, I wouldn't have the comfort and the access that I have in dance today. So you have to think about the community you're trying to build. You know, what access do they have? What understanding do they have? Did they go to see dance as a child? Did they understand it in school? You know, what does that mean? I don't think that our dance audiences have to be the traditional dance audiences that we always see. I think it could be anyone and everyone, but we have to be strategic. How do we develop them? That's where the word community comes in, because then you start to look at these shared interests so that they're points of entry for building audiences for dance. So as I mentioned, not everyone's going to take out a subscription. Not everyone's going to fly over to City Center. Not everyone's going to the Joyce. But they're going to the library to read books. They're in college. You know, they're going to the bookstore. They're at Whole Foods. So dance has to be where people are. That's how we start to build our audiences. So we put legs on it, and dance has legs. So let's put legs and keep them moving so that when we think about who are the people that I want, where do they live and play, then we start to frame our community around that. I also think that we have to have a narrative when we talk about building community. You know, we don't just, it's difficult to just do it in isolation, so it's like, well, who knew about the show? Me, your mom, your aunt, your cousin. Okay, so where's the narrative? There's a narrative that goes, what tool do we use? Social media. Believe me, back in the 80s, we didn't have social media. How do we build tools? Word of mouth. I remember, you know, working with Larry Phillips, and we're, you know, press releases and flyers. That was the extent of what we had. Now, oh my gosh, there's so much more that we can utilize. So dance should be at the forefront of how we're using social media to talk about dance. It's so visual. You don't have to have a film crew to do it. You have a phone. That's all you need. Videotape, you use snippets of that, start to tell the story. So you can start with building the work. What is the theme of the work? You know, who's in the work? All of those pieces become ways to create points of entry. And so you guide this narrative, you know, that leads up to a performance, during the performance, and post-performance. So there's this constant discussion about what dance means, what it feels like, what it looks like. Then your community is sustainable. We're not talking about an audience for one show and then everybody goes home and says, oh, that was lovely. We're talking about a sustained effort of how are we building community audiences for dance that follow with us, you know, every step of the way. And so that's something we have to be very tactical about. So I've had the good fortune to work with Dance USA for, I think, close to 10 years. And doing that, you know, been able to observe how dance is being developed throughout the country. And, you know, certainly the intent is always there. There's always a solid intent to develop audiences, diverse audiences for dance. Where there is a challenge is the infrastructure. How do we do it? You know, we're barely able to put the work up. Costumes we got from Costco. So like, how are we gonna, you know, you're talking about building an audience with what? You know, so the infrastructure becomes a real challenge, and that's why it's so wonderful we have these programs like EDA. But even if you don't have EDA support, you start where you are. I'm a firm believer in starting where you are and what's in front of you. And so you look at what you're a member of and start to build your community from that. Whether it's your church, whether it's your school, your library, your community. Women's social groups have been fantastic audiences for dance. Unbelievable. You know, really, really great. So I think those things become important. So just quickly, one of the things I did at New Jersey Performing Arts Center when I first started working there 4 years ago, we were really struggling with audiences for dance. And we presented about 6 to 7 dance companies throughout the season. So I thought, we need help. So I created a Celebrate Dance Advisory Committee. And I always make sure I use the word celebrate, because this is not this heavy, you know, austere experience. Dance is fantastic. So Celebrate Dance Advisory Committee. You can use that if you like. And so this Celebrate Dance Advisory Committee, they tell me how they think the best way is to build community for dance based on where they stand. So some of them are choreographers, some are dancers, some are dance critics, some are people who just love dance. Well, when we have yoga instructors also. So when we all get together, there's this real magic that emits from the conversation. So then we put together a plan. So for the year, we can then look at how do we utilize all the things that are happening in Newark, all the things that touch these individuals to build communities for dance in a sustained fashion. And so that then leads us to a program called Books on the Move, where we read to children about Alvin Ailey in the libraries. Each child gets a free book. We are performing in the colleges. I do panel discussions about cultural diversity in dance. What are the challenges of female choreographers that we target to social studies classes? You know, really being very strategic. We have a liturgical dance workshop that we do throughout the season that helps us focus on our Alvin Ailey Mother's Day annual presentations. And those women are so happy at those liturgical dance workshops. They're free. We also do regular dance workshops. And then we have our yoga workshops. You know, so we're using as much of what we have in terms of content, to really be able to create this environment and community for dance. And I would just close by saying, Amy started talking about innovation. And I think each of you in this room, that should be what you lead with. How can I be an innovator? How can I really advance this field of dance? What will it look like 50 years from now? That's what I want you to focus on. I want you to be bold, because we dance. What can't we do? And I want you to feel completely empowered to utilize your best thinking way up here, not the easy stuff that challenges you, and think about, this is how I'm going to really sustain my dance audience and to make sure that I can create the kind of work that I live and breathe for. So I will be watching. I can't wait to see what's going to be next, the next 10, 15, 20 years, and I'll be standing right next to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was remiss in mentioning, Donna is one of the technical assistance consultants that advises the grantees. So you can imagine getting some support from this woman. Marjani.
Yes. You can do whatever you want. Stand at a podium. I'll just stand up here.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. How are you guys? Good afternoon. So I want to share that I am here, not a former facilitator, actually currently work as a facilitator. No, it's okay, it's good. I work as a facilitator through Urban Bush Women's BOLD, Builders, Organizers, and Leaders Through Dance, meaning that I'm a part of a teaching arm of the organization, and I share some of our practices around community engagement, specifically our entering, building, and exiting community workshops. So that's part of my work also, and so I'll be speaking to you from that perspective, and I'll also be speaking to you as a choreographer, as someone who has internalized the practices that I have been training and sharing as a member of Urban Bush Women over the past years. Spend some time. So I just want to say, one, how grateful I am to hear many of Donna's words, but the one that, or some of the things that stood the most out to me is this notion of community is you, our community. And I want to start there with the idea that I am community. That was one of the first things that I learned being a part of Urban Bush Women. A 30-year-old organization that identifies itself in its mission as a dance company that tells the untold and undertold stories of disenfranchised communities through movement of the African diaspora from a woman-centered perspective. That's me. So that feels really important, I think, before we start to talk about, or as we talk about community engagement, and as we as organizations look at the way that we're interacting with community, that we identify who we are. How are we made up? What are our histories? What are our cultural perspectives? What are we coming with? What is our background? That feels really important, and it has been really important to Urban Bush Women's work. The second thing that, as I thought about Urban Bush Women's work and some of what I've internalized with the organization, is this idea of the storyteller. Urban Bush Women, the work that's coming out of the company and that the company tours with are stories that come out of our communities. Now see, let me be specific about that. When I say our communities, I'm talking about Black folk. See, the company is predominantly Black folk. And it's important for me to share that with you really honestly and really forthright, because those are not necessarily the folks who were populating our audiences. So when we talk about audience engagement is community engagement, that right there immediately challenges that statement. And so much of Urban Bush Women's early work in community engagement started with acknowledging that truth. And realizing that in order to cycle the work that we're doing through the communities where those stories are coming from, we have to go beyond the stage in innovative and also holistic and cultural truth kind of ways, where we remember how we grew up. We remember what we did and how we spoke, what we shared, when we had fun, what kind of music we played, ways that we engaged. If we wanted to, one, either get those folks in the audience or continue to allow the work to feed the communities that we are a part of. It's one thing to check off boxes and get butts in the seats. While we really enjoy that and while that's helpful in many ways, it's also important to remember that we're not constantly pulling stories from communities and taking them out and constantly in this sort of one-way, transaction, exactly. But that the work is really cycling in a way that continues to nourish our communities in a really full way. So I've internalized that in my own practice as a choreographer, especially as an experimental choreographer. One of the things that I realized is, okay, Urban Bush Woman is 30 years old, right? They found early in their practice that their audiences didn't necessarily look like them or sound like them. Here we are 30 years later, and it's still the case. I don't know that that's necessarily because the artists aren't doing the work. Surely, as we see, there are systemic and institutional constructs that are connected to why our audiences don't necessarily look like the beauty of this room. My goodness, you're killing it in here. You look good. There's a reason why that's the case. And so, considering that there are many constructs that we're working with or that we're working up against, the question becomes, how do we do the work? So Urban Bush Woman, through many different prototypes and evaluations and questions and hardship, eventually landed with the Summer Leadership Institute. And the Summer Leadership Institute is inviting artists of many different disciplines and forms to come into a room and share practices. Surely Urban Bush Woman has a practice, right, that we also share in that institute. But ultimately, that Summer Leadership Institute is to acknowledge the knowledge in our communities and in the room, to continue to build and share ways of how do we take on these constructs in a way that is creating progress. Another way that Urban Bush Woman has looked at taking on those constructs is the Choreographic Center recently. A newer venture in the organization's movement, so to speak. But that venture is also looking at why is it, how do we continue to cultivate female voices of color that are working, and gender non-conforming voices of color that are working in our field and making work? How do we continue to cultivate their information? How do we continue to get them to build, to take risks? How do we get them to continue to make excellent work and ask the hard questions, right? So those are some of the ways that Urban Bush Woman has done that work. 2 minutes, okay. Finally, or not quite finally, almost finally. The last thing that I want to talk about, or that I think I want to push, is that Urban Bush Woman is a 30-year-old company, and I am about 5 years in my practice. Ooh, 7 years. Good Lord. Okay, that's not a long time. That's cool. About 7 years in my practice as an independent artist. Those two were apples and oranges. In fact, I think I'm more like a seed coming out of Urban Bush Woman's fruit. You know, like the fruit came and then this. I feel like that's important to note. Because all of this, when we talk about community engagement, is about time and process. It's a slow crawl, right? So sometimes we have our institutions asking us to check these boxes. How many people did you have? How many people were black? How many people were brown? How many people were white? White Latino? How many people were black Latino, right? Right? Census? Anybody fill those check boxes? When I apply for positions at universities, they ask me if I'm white Latino or black Latino or, you know what I'm saying? Really complicated things. Those are institutions constantly asking us to fit into these boxes that do not fit our realities. And so how do we continue to push up against those things? And the truth is that that's a slow crawl. And Urban Bush Woman's work, while we might see them, while some of us might see them and go, oh my God, like I love what you said, Suzanne. They write the book on community engagement. Well, the thing is, Urban Bush Woman was questioning that idea of outreach before engagement was ever even being used in that way. And that in itself was a slow crawl that came in partnership with work that we were doing with Junebug Productions in New Orleans. through a long 3-month engagement residency that showed us exactly how much we don't know. And so you have to know that we're gonna bump and we're gonna fall and we're gonna make lots of mistakes, as did I, making a 3-year work looking at, okay, so I gotta stop. Can I have to tell you one last thing? This is hard, this is different than on the phone.
A 3-year-long work that was looking at.
Last thing I was going to say is I love that Donna said, think way up here, go way up here. I love that. Can I add to that? Yes. That if we're talking about community engagement, we think way down here. What? That we go way down here in the conversation and continue to use ourselves as our greatest resource. Asha.
Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Clearly. Thank you, Marjorie. Thank you, Donna. This is very interesting. I want to say thank you to Dance USA. Thank you to Suzanne. Thank you to Amy. It's an honor to really be on this panel, especially with my former professor. Just give him my shout out. You know, so now I got to show and prove that I learned something in class, right? So I'm going to sit, because I know there's some slides going. But I want to start by saying we're all here because we know that art and we know that dance has the ability to break down a lot of barriers and be a space for people to really communicate. But, you know, I want to say that, you know, you can't just enter a community and think that your art is enough. Right? You can't do that. Art is absolutely always pushing people and policy forward. But at the same time, it's not just on us to entertain, we have to educate, right? So this is something that Camille A. Brown and Dancers is committed to. It's in our mission, and it's not just about the performances that we do, which are great. If you haven't seen the company, you definitely should. But, little plug, you know. But at the same time, we're definitely about providing a space and being a catalyst for dialogue, especially for these challenging and tough issues that Camille is facing and dealing with in her work, from identity, race, and culture in particular. So I'm gonna address some of the different ways in which we connect with community so that you can see the various things in which we do. And then just keep it going from there. So the first work that's a part of a trilogy that Camille created was called Mr. Tolerance, and it's dealing with stereotypes and African American humor and the fact that we all wear a mask, whether we want to admit it or not. You know, we turn it on, we turn it off, we do what we need to do to get through. And one of the things that Camille wanted to deal with, because we were talking about minstrelsy, we were talking about issues where there were people who were saying, you know, at the time Obama was president and, you know, we're living in this post-racial society. There were all of these things that were being said, and she was like, no. You know, there's still some things that we need to talk about. And so it wasn't just about creating this evening-length work and having people applaud and leave the space. We wanted to make sure that we left room to really talk about this and talk about what people saw and talk about what people felt. And in order to do that, what we did was we created a part of the show that's called The Dialogue. And for us, it is literally a part of the performance. It is built in. This is not a post-show Q&A. Yes, you can leave if you want to leave right after the performance, but it's really recommended that you stay to really have this full experience. And even if you don't say anything or ask a question, sometimes it's about what's shared in that space, especially after witnessing the performance, that allows people to really engage in a different way, even with their own community that they're a part of. Because again, we're touring, right? So it's not even our community base in terms of home for New York City for us, but it looks different, it sounds different, and so really creating that space was important for us. And so again, that's a part of the piece itself, and it's something that we've been able to transfer over into the additional works that we do and that Camille is creating. As part of round 3, we received funding for Black Girl Spectrum. Now, Black Girl Spectrum is a community engagement initiative specifically for young Black girls and Black women to empower them to live as creative citizens. And this particular engagement activity and program was created alongside of Camille's work, Black Girl Linguistic Play, which is part 2 of the trilogy. And that's dealing with the complexities of being a Black woman, and kind of looking at the different, the evolution of that, from childhood games to, you know, competition with one another, to mother-daughter relationships as well. And so when looking at that work in particular, Camille said, okay, well, I want to actually have something that lives on its own and that's still connected to the community, whether the work continues or not. You know, she wanted to make sure that there was something else within the community that could stay there. And so we developed this initiative in a program which actually lives separately from the work. And we can do it separately from the work, which is a great experience. And so we've been able to do that both in New York City and as the company tours. And so what we do in these different workshops, it can writing sessions, actual movement. Obviously, we use social dance as a vehicle and an entry point for, especially for young people, to really begin to embrace their bodies and be empowered in that way, because that's movement that at the time is coming natural to them. And they feel most comfortable in that space. And so we've been able to create these different workshop opportunities and experiences for them that go over time. But what I will say is that even when creating that and doing it, we didn't make assumptions. And I think that's something else that you have to recognize when you're doing community engagement and when you're going into a community, especially if it is not your own. And by your own, that can be where you're based. That could be, for us, you know, Black folk, as Marjani said. You know, it can be a variety of things, but I think it's important to not make assumptions of what people need, you know, or what people want, because that may not really be what's happening. And so you need to have those kind of preliminary conversations. And for us, as much as we have an idea of all of the various things we can do with Black Girl Spectrum, we always have a conversation with that group in which we're working with. So what are you missing? What's needed right now? You know, how can we enhance that experience? Yes, we have all the tools that we want to do, but it's not just about us. It's not about what we want to do. It's also about, if we're really talking about making a change and impacting, then we're gonna have to make sure that we're actually addressing also the need that's there. And also, part of Black Girl Linguistic Play, there's actually, and I'm not sure, oh, there it is, see, right on time, go Adira. So there's actually, for those of you who have seen Black Girl Linguistic Play, and those of you who have not, there is actually a mural that the company literally does every night with chalk, and they draw images of their reflection of their childhood, things that remind them of what it was like to be a young Black girl growing up and becoming, you know, a Black woman. And so what we have done after performances is we have smaller versions of this chalkboard that we allow people to write on, to draw on, essentially doing a smaller version of this mural. And it's always interesting to see what's written or what's drawn on these, because in the beginning, especially for student shows, in the beginning of a show, Camille will say, when you hear the phrase Black girl, what comes to mind? Anybody can throw something out. Just hair. Strong. Magical. I love that y'all are so positive, and I really appreciate that. Reality is, thank you, keep it real. Attitude. Loud. But, okay, so to be honest, in the development of the work, and even when Camille has done this for young people in particular, it is more negative stereotypes than it is positive affirmations of young Black girls and Black women, right? So her asking that question in the beginning, she can take all that and she asks them to sit with that. They perform the work, we go into the dialogue, right? But we're able to have this communication with them, and we talk about it. And it's interesting how now that they've been through this journey, they have different feelings of what it, you know, what it is and how they would respond to that question. And that also is reflected when they actually draw on the chalkboards, which is nice to see. And it's a great memento for the company too, to kind of see the impact that they're having in community and sharing. So I know I've been given the cue, but yes, I'll slow down now. Back to you, Suzanne.
These artists, run right out. And keep seeing it. I mean, a few things I heard, and then I know from experience, seeing the work live over the years, is that these engagement strategies, as Donna might call them, or programs come directly out of the work itself. There is nothing that's just off the shelf for these particular artists. And I think it goes to some of the things that you all shared today that you said. Indira said, don't make assumptions, ask what is needed. Donna talked about the intent versus the infrastructure, as did Marjani. And yeah, with that, I think we can start with questions. No wrong questions, so whatever you have to ask.
Thank you all for being here so much. I think I'm really interested in this notion of process, and I wanted to know from anyone on the panel how what you characterize as like preemptive actions before you even get to the space or into the community.
Actions you take before you get to the space. Donna?
Yes, for me, it's always research. I'm a lawyer by training, so I can't do anything without understanding what I have and what does it look like and what are the challenges. And so for me, going into Newark, I live in Brooklyn, my whole career has been in Harlem. And so I didn't know anyone in Newark, I didn't know what dance looked like in Newark, but I just knew I had to do dance in Newark. So how do you do that? So I started by doing research. So I started asking, various organizations, started to create, as I mentioned, the advisory council to figure out what are the resources, what are the understanding, and exactly as was said, what do people really want? It's not about imposing what you think it should be. You have to really ask people so it's organic. So that's a process. And so dance needs time to process that. So if you've got a performance date in June, that means this begins in the fall. You've got to have time to really educate yourself so you can really properly, have a dialogue and present and represent the needs and interests. And then based on this kind of, collaboration, you develop a plan as to how you're going to really roll this out and build a sustainable model. I don't do anything that's not long-term in thinking. We just don't have the time.
Indira or Marjani, anything to add about this idea of how you get started and how far in advance?
I think one of the things I realized too is, and in our conversation, Suzanne, is I feel like it's one thing to speak through the lens of a 30-year-old organization. It's another thing, like I see a lot of my colleagues and sisters in here, to speak through the lens of an individual artist asking these questions. And I think I'll say to that question around process, for my work, like in this work, over 3 years, started off looking at the intersecting narratives of mental illness, substance abuse, and systemic oppression. I think that even getting to that was a long process, and then eventually left that sort of thesis. But I think one of the ways that helped me have conversations with audiences was identifying what were my questions in the work. And I realized that as I'm going into a new work, one of the presenters I'm working with asked me, so what do you want to do with our audiences? What are some engagement actions? And I said, I don't know yet. I'm still building the work. I have to find out what the questions are that are surfacing in the work. And I feel like that is a way for me to really have a mutual cycle-like conversation with both my audiences and or communities that may go beyond that audience wherever it is that I'm going.
And I'll say also, adding to that the questions are very important. For Camille, I will say that our process and her process is very long when she's creating work. Camille is very heady. She will watch this and then say, why am I saying all of this? But Camille's very heady. She is very, intellectual. She likes to be in the book. She's gonna get every kind of piece of research that she can as she's developing a work. And that also goes for the company members. So sometimes if you come to a rehearsal, people are excited to see movement, and they may be sitting in a circle for 45 minutes, talking. That is process. It's not different than, okay, yeah, they're dancing for an hour, and I think there's value in that, and there's substance in that, and that's what makes it translate on stage, when you're able to have that kind of pure intention and coming from that place. And I think because that's how she does her work and development of her work, that's the same thing that that's how it translates into what we do in community. And I will also shout out Ebony Noel Golden, who is our principal engagement strategist who we work with. It's that same kind of talking, that conversation, that investigating, that really figuring out what the needs are that we do as well.
Great. We have another question up here. So it's a long-term process. Research takes a lot of forms, it sounds like.
So as an individual artist, talking to 3 organizations that are more established and have longer term, is there a way that being embedded in the community as an individual artist who either grew up there or lives there currently, can we start forming partnerships so that research that you're talking about, turning over, because I understand also that Camila or Urban Bush Women have their own repertory, but also turning it over to the individual artists who may be more embedded and their work directly relates to the smaller community. So again, because our organizations don't even have a budget of $70,000,
I'm just gonna drop this right here. This whole thing doesn't exist without collaboration and partnerships. So like that's literally the one thing. So the short answer is yes to you, but I mean, everything that we do, I feel like a lot of people in this room can attest to the fact that if it had not been for a partner, if it had not been for a collaborator, someone, you know, even just willing to have a conversation with you about how in which you can develop and grow and all of these other things, it don't move.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, oh, thank you. I would just say, lead the way. You have a jewel. Use it. I think one of the things artists suffer from is apologizing that we're artists. Let's start acting like kings and queens. You have this royal connection into the community that the organization actually needs, because most marketing departments don't have the time to build those kind of relationships. They're running from show to show. You can lead the way, be the thread, and you say, I'm the one that connects you. And put a little dollar sign on that too.
Okay, I'll hold it. I can speak loudest. Okay. I wanted to go to your comment about who's in the audience, because I went to a show recently where it was another African-American choreographer, and there were none of us in the audience. You know what I mean? So it's like, what is it about getting our community in the audience? Where is it, you're saying like, oh, it might not always be the artist, but then what do we have to say? Is it ticket prices? Is it where we're performing? If it's not in the community, they're not gonna go to Joyce, they're not gonna go to whatever. Like, where is the disconnect to get them in the seats? We're telling your stories where hopefully we can get the prices down, because it's that, we look like you, we sound like you, we get you. Where's the disconnect?
I am rocking because I'm about to say something that I think, you know, I was gonna say. All right, so if you know, my classes come back to my mind, but have they even been invited? There might also be this assumption that, okay, I'm black, I'm doing this black work, so now all the black people are gonna come out. No. I mean, but no, I mean, we're being candid. I think this is family, this is space, and we can be transparent about this. You know, that's not how it works. So at the same time, I may know that you're doing work, I may have seen it in a flyer or on an email or whatever, but I haven't really felt like I've been invited and that you actually want me there.
Exactly. Because we are so accustomed to not being invited. So why is this any different? So if you want us to come, act like it.
Right.
That means build relationships. So the success that I've had has been because of the relationships, not because of me. Necessarily even the dance. It's because I was connecting to the heart of the community and bringing those two together. So when I work with my female organizations, my fraternities, sororities, my churches, this is what they want. This has been a relationship. We sat down, we've talked, we had lunch, talk about the kids, I know about the husband, the cat, the dog. All of that equals the result. So that's where the patience comes in, the tenacity to not give up, to be nimble, so that you can go whichever way we need to go to make this happen. But having the vision, you know, and you really, really have the kind of conviction that no matter what, we're gonna make this work.
Can I add a little something to this about capacity? Okay, because I'm an individual artist with a 16-month-old son and a huge rent, and you know, a lot going on. So after I leave rehearsal and after I write a couple of emails, it's probably time to start the bedtime routine for the day. You know what I mean? Like the day is short. And so I feel like it's also important to talk a little bit about capacity, and this is why I said process and time. Because, for example, Urban Bushwoman has a huge network, right? So if people know Urban Bushwoman's coming now, at this point, they're calling the office. Yo, I saw you were coming to Chicago. Can you guys come, right? And it was like, bet, we'll be there, you know? But Marjani Forte Saunders is coming to Bentonville, Arkansas. You know what I mean? You know, so but it's like, you know, but then I got like 5 collaborators I'm working with. They might know some people. And then I got a company manager I'm working with now, so that helps a little bit. So I'm like, hey, can we reach out? But I know that the first time I get there, I probably won't have an audience like this. But maybe the second or the third, if I keep building those relationships, I'll start to build an audience, right?
So one of the theme of today, one of them is in this intent versus infrastructure. Donna, anything to add on this point? I'm assuming a lot of the dance makers in the room are relatively small budget maybe, so.
Well, I think we're talking about measurements of success. And I think that we have to project modestly. You know, so while you're thinking about it, the sold out house, the success, you said you went to performance, it was predominantly white, there was no African Americans. Would 3 be a success? Would 5 be a success? So who's in the room to begin with? Who's in the city? You know, when I toured with Bringing the Noise and DTH and all these shows, we would go to Seattle. I mean, there's 3% African Americans. I met all of them. So when we had that 3% of the audience, that's all there was. There was no more. So we have to really look at what's the reality. What should we expect? And at the same time, welcome the white folks who came. We are thrilled that they came because they're helping us to celebrate dance.
Should we sing?
Other questions? One more question? Yes.
Hi y'all, thank you so much. So I don't mean to make this sound like a final grant report question, but what has the process been of sustaining this work after the funding is gone? Because the work is amazing, and what's the longevity of that?
That's Indira's answer.
I know, right? This is still a process. I mean, you know, finding the other resources to support it. And I think the other thing, at least for us, because particularly with Black Girl Spectrum, we're doing that here, but then we're also doing it when the company is on tour and working with community organizations wherever the company is touring. And so I think what I'm interested in and what I'm looking forward to is maintaining those relationships that we have on tour and figuring out the ways in which there's going to be ways to collaborate even to get increased funding to continue it, because we're also looking at 2 different things that are, happening. One being in New York and what that looks like with the partners that we work with here versus when the company is actually touring. So for me, it's about figuring out the 2 strategies that will work best, both for what happens here and then what happens when the company's touring, which is totally different. I'm not even really sure if that answers it, but it's in the making, it's in process. Pray on it with me.
Donna, do you think this notion of a partnership forming is what takes work from being one time to sustained, or?
Oh, absolutely. You know, at NJPAC, my first year, we started with working with Jack and Jill, which is an African-American charitable organization who like to have events for their children that are rooted in the culture. And we had lunch and dinner and started talking. Year 2, they brought a group to see Ailey. Year 3, they brought a group to see Savion Glover and Black Violins. This past year, we programmed their Black History Month with Ife Tayo, African Dance Ensemble, and a whole Black History Month. They've also purchased 200 tickets to see Ailey in May. So that's 4 years to get to that point. So it really is, having this timing. And again, it goes back to success and measurements of success and giving yourself time to figure it out, but also for the audience to decide this is what I want. So they were figuring us out as well.
So I'm afraid we are out of time. We're not out of town. Well, I am, but you're not. Anyway, dancing likes to end with an action step. So we have a question for you. We started with this notion of community. We've been delving into it, audiences and community. Can we go back to our popcorn share? Any new notions of community or community building, or how the thought shared with you today might influence how you think about community? Anybody can yell out anything.
Do your research.
Do your research.
Slow and steady.
Slow and steady.
It's a process. Plant
It's a
seeds.
process. I heard, and be sure you invite them in. Partnerships. Intent versus infrastructure.
Dance walks. Dance walks.
Dance walks. I also heard, be bold because Donna's going to be watching.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being here.